Everybody, it's Saturday, so we're thinking about the second lesson. And this week, the second lesson is from 1 Corinthians 12. And it's Paul talking about the gifts of the Spirit. And the one big thing that he wants everybody to remember is there might be a lot of gifts, there might be a lot of activities, there might be a lot of work to be done, but it's all from one Spirit. It's all one God. Everything comes together. And I want to just talk a little bit and reflect a little bit about my personal experience with things like gifts of the Spirit. So when I went to seminary, one of the first things they did was they said, you guys got to take this weekend class thing. And it was in a book called Network. It was a class. And it came from a church up near Chicago named Willow Creek. And what it was spiritual gifts identification. So you go through all this stuff and you at the end of it, you determine, well, these seem to be the spiritual gifts God has given me. And so then you're to reflect on those things and to figure out how do we use those? How do we use those in the service of the church? And so my reflection was, you know what? The gifts that I've got, if you took those things and you adapted them and put them to use for commercial purposes, you'd be really good at what I used to do. And I was really good at what I used to do. So what God was saying was, John, you put that to the wrong purpose. I want you to put it to work for me. I want you to use that because I gave them to you. I gave them to you for this reason. Doesn't mean that you won't make any money. Doesn't mean you're going to go broke. Just means what I want you to do it for me. And so I said, okay, yeah, it went that smoothly. No, it didn't go that smoothly. It took me a long time from the time I knew that I was called to the time I went to seminary. It took a very long time. And there were multitude of reasons for that. But the reality was though that I began to see these things and began to say, all right, Lord, how do I develop these gifts? One of the things that I learned in seminary from a mentor, Chuck Murphy, was real simple, and that is that most of what you do provides very little return. So what you do is you focus on your strengths. I had to explain that to Will at one point. Our son, he was a good baseball player, and so we sent him to different coaches and stuff that worked with him and mentored him and all that kind of stuff. And he misunderstood that. He thought we thought that he wasn't all that good. I said, no, no, no. I learned a long time ago. Invest in your strengths. Don't invest in your weaknesses. Invest in your strengths. Work on your weaknesses, but really invest in those things that you're really, really good at. And that's the way that we should do things. And too often we spin our wheels. And so the benefit of knowing spiritual gifts is that you can put them to work in a way where they're most effective. You're not wasting your time doing things that you're ill suited for. But one of the problems with spiritual gifts is that some of them are a little flashier than others. Some of them are upfront things where you're preaching, you're singing, you're doing whatever, and you get acclaim for that because people notice that you're using your gifts. And then there are other gifts that are a lot quieter, like service, administration, those kinds of things. And they don't tend to get a whole lot of credit. They don't tend to get a lot of acclaim. There's not a lot of banquets given for people who serve well. There's some, not that many, but mostly people notice the stuff that's out front. And if you're in the charismatic world, well, you know exactly what gifts are going to be celebrated there. So, but the problem becomes then we get frustrated because we see other people getting credit for this, that, and the other thing, and we just get overlooked. And it's a really easy thing to do, and it's easy to get into a pity party mode too. And so, because I've seen it, I've probably done it too. But at any rate, the thing is, what we need to be really good at, what every single one of us needs to be really good at, is noticing what other people do. Take less notice of what you do and more notice of what other people do. And then when you see somebody serving and doing things in ways that doesn't get a lot of attention, give it attention. Be really good at encouraging people. That to me is one of the things when I was at Pauley's, one of the things that I was able to do because I was just pastoral care guy, right? So when I first took the job, the first thing they told me was, well, we think it'll be about 3 half days a week. Well, there's 1,100 people here, but I'll work however many days I think needs to be done to get the job done. And then it didn't take long until I was full time. So, but one of the things in addition to that I was supposed to do was to oversee the production of the newsletter. Well, I have no skills for that. I don't. I have no earthly idea how to do that. Well, so I was happy to find out that somebody else actually like composed it and put everything in places and all that kind of stuff. All I had to do was to make sure that it got literally put together. The pages got put together, and then that I printed off all the mailing labels Then I had to learn how to do the postage part of it, and I would take it to the post office. I would take, just tons of these things to the post office every month. Well, what happened was there was a group of women who were doing the newsletter, and they were typically older women, and they've been around the parish a long time, and this was the way they were continuing to serve. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to go down and hang out. So I went down and hung out with them and started encouraging them and telling them how happy I was to get together with them. I started feeding them lunch once a month, and I would hang out for 2 3 hours. Well, after about 3 months, I'm going to tell you the truth. We had twice as many people putting the newsletter together. Why? Because they knew I'd be there, and they knew that I would be there, and they could give me a hard time. They could say anything they wanted about me and make fun of me and all that kind of stuff, and I didn't care. But I would be there. My presence mattered to them. And so then I began to ask other people, hey, do you know people that are distant from the parish? I asked people who'd been around a long time, and they said, yeah, I do. I said, well, let's have lunch with them. And so we would do that. And so, but it was just a matter of encouraging people and celebrating people when you find out they were doing a good thing. And then I got kind of overwhelmed with the pastoral care part of it. And when I say overwhelmed, I mean, I just didn't have time to do it all. So we raised up a Stephen ministry group. And I trained that first group, and they had their own leaders and everything else. It worked really, really well. It was awesome. But I had a guy in the church who had had a closed head injury, and he had benefited from Stephen ministry, and he was a huge champion of it. So I had him come up front and talk about his experience with that. And he was a guy that people would have just overlooked most of the time, and he did a fabulous job. And we ended up with like 40 people the first day out of the box. It was a fantastic thing. But there's so many easy ways to say, hey, I noticed. I notice you. I notice what you're doing. And I'm really, really thankful for that. I'm thankful that you're here today to answer the phone, and you volunteered to be here half a day just answering the phone. And so I'm thankful for that. And so, but just notice and then tell them you noticed, and tell them how happy you are, and tell them how much their gifts mean. And then what we can do is we can maybe stop being kind of jealous of one another, who people who get the attention and acclaim and all that kind of stuff. But the gifts are all to be celebrated. That's the point. Is that just because some are upfront gifts doesn't mean they're more important than those other gifts. And so my encouragement to everybody is get really good at noticing those people who tend to be overlooked, and then make much of them. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.